Any other question? Oh, question where we disagree with superior or treatment. How do we balance advocating for patient and scope of practice? Oh, such a long question. Where we disagree with a superior on patient treatment, how do we balance advocating for patient and scope of practice and being willing to learn? Wow. What'd you say, Kevin?
I mean, the thing with this is to give like the right answer, like, okay, I'm gonna have to, somehow tell, but be smart about it and be like superhuman. Like, I would just tell my emotions, like, guys, okay, like, this is obviously a very difficult scenario because this is my supervisor. I don't want to be disrespectful to them. They have a wealth of clinical expertise and knowledge. I don't want to disrespect that. So I might consider, hey, talking with a resident, talking to someone else a little higher than me on my team, asking them what they think, and maybe they can help me approach the attending in the right manner.
No, that's a great answer. I actually got this question today. Oh my God. Bring flashbacks. But I also talked about, I was a resident, but I talked about, balancing the making patient feel safe and creating a welcoming space in healthcare with your working relationship with the preceptor. And I decided to like approach the preceptor in a respectful manner, approaching him in a curious manner just to understand his perspective as well, and understand, is he doing this out of like maleficence, or is he just being an old guy who's making like a inappropriate joke, and really try to approach it in a respectful way and educate him to your I guess power dynamic in the team. And ultimately I want to make sure my priority, I don't know what Kevin's priority is, my priority is making sure that the patient feels safe and is welcomed in the healthcare space. So yeah, that's my approach. How are you preparing for Carl's interview? Oh man, it's the same way as UBC interview, except I'm a lot more lazier and I have senioritis. But same way, and for UBC, it's MMI all over again. So you gotta get ready for health policy, you gotta get ready for your ethics, gotta get ready for personal stories, as you guys are. So positive and negative for our chemists. Everything is the same. So you guys have a lot of practice. For MMI, how do you know how long you should speak for, but also allow time for follow-up? I think rules of 2 minutes is a good length to aim for. Anything longer than 2 minutes, the interviewers lose interest. Anything less than 2 minutes, I don't think you're developing your answer enough. So 2 to 3 minutes. I think for UBC specifically, they ask for 2 minutes. For Queens, whereas asynchronous, they have whole 5 minutes. So fill that space up and develop your answer, so you're not sitting there at the end of 1 minute just staring at the screen. So school dependent, but a good rule of thumb is 2 to 3 minutes. Do we answer the question in the beginning in the thesis, or should we give pros and cons and then final answer? Oh, that's a good question. To me personally, if it's a policy question, I like to talk about, this is a very interesting policy that considers multiple stakeholders and has both advantages and disadvantages, and then go through my advantages and disadvantages and then give a stance. That avoids you giving a stance in the beginning, and as you go through a point, you're like, oh wait, that's actually not my stance. So I think to develop your answer first, and then make sure though in the end that you have enough time to give your stance if it's asking you for an opinion. So yeah, in the end is how I do it, but personal preferences. The collaborator has a handover competency and recognizing one's own limit. Yeah, that's more for like the practicing physician, but for pre-med, I don't know if you guys are handing over patients yet. So any scenario we're able to collaborate with people from different perspectives, different walks of life, different disciplines are all good examples to have. Okay. Do you reference your essay or application? No, not for Canadian schools. Although if you have really good stories in your essay, I would totally reuse it for MMI because it's actually really hard to think of good life stories to tell. Sure, most of our stories come from personal statements, secondary essay. Oh, I think is that for you, Kevin, for Americans?
Which question?
Will most of our stories come from personal statement or secondary questions? Or is it okay to use other examples when it applies?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, American schools have secondary applications. Feel free to repeat them. I mean, is that the question? Sorry, I was answering some other person right now.
Yeah, I think, as long as it's an example that you can memorize,
Yeah.
and spit out on your MMI that's really interesting, very engaging, very unique to you, then use it. It's actually really hard to come up with unique answers. So any story you get, just hold on to it and reuse it. And the thing with MMI is like your new interviewer will not know the story you told at the previous station. So if you have a good answer, you can just reuse it. You know, a time where you show communication skills is the time I resolve conflicts well. So I'm holding on to that one story for my entire comms interview. During the thinking time before you answer, what do you write down and how does it differ for personal ethics policy station?
Susan, this will be the last one before we let you go.
Awesome. Sure, I'll answer this one. Let me just repeat this. During your thinking time before you answer, what do you write down and how does it differ for personal policy ethics station? Oh, I don't write down anything because I'm a solo writer and 2 minutes is really short. So I recommend before you go into the actual MMI, get really good at abstract thinking and practice that. So you're able to think about all the ideas and slot it into a structure. Obviously different for personal ethics and policy in your mind. So you're not wasting time looking down and be distracted, and just take a deep breath for the 10 seconds before you answer and just review your structure and then go into it. I personally think it's a waste of time writing down answer, but power to you if you're a good paper person, not me though. Awesome.
Well, all right, y'all. Thanks, Susan. Was that it?
Yeah, there's a couple more questions, but
Yeah. Well, Sue, guys, I mean, we gotta let Susan go. I got 5 more guest speakers, but thank you very much, Susan, for joining. If you would like to talk with Susan some more, she is on our website, thebrightdoctor.com/marketplace, where we have many medical students across Canada, across the United States who are applying there. And you can, book them by the hour, right? Instead of paying some big prep company $300 an hour, $400 an hour, which, I might have done and regretted. And they usually connect with medical students anyways. And you guys know probably of a competitor we have in the space. Unlike them, we let you pay in Canadian dollars for the consults. There's 0 platform fee, 0 per booking fee, okay? 0 per session fee. And we take, there's no tax right now on any of our consultants. So whatever price you see when you convert to Canadian is that price. You just click on whichever consultant you want to look at, check out their profile, and you can switch to Canadian dollars, pick any package, and so on and so forth. Thank you again, Susan, and I wish you, again, all the best in your interviews. And thank you for sharing your advice with us.
Okay. Good luck, everyone. You'll do great.
All right. Next up, we have Kara, who's a first-year medical student at McMaster University. All right, so in Hamilton, Ontario. It's her first time joining one of our sessions, and we're very lucky to have her. She's going to talk about how to incorporate CAMEDs in your answer, especially with the scholar, professional, and health advocate pillars. Welcome, Kara.
Thanks, Kevin, for the intro. As Kevin said, my name is Kara, and I'm a first-year medical student at McMaster. I'm originally from Alberta, grew up in rural Alberta my whole life, and did my undergrad at Western in microbiology and immunology. And I was fortunate enough to get a couple of interviews in my 3rd year, and I was able to get an acceptance to McMaster. So I'm going to be talking generally about CanMed's role and the importance of that incorporating into personal experiences. But first, I kind of want to talk about where my mind was at when I got my interviews. So first of all, I want to say congratulations to everyone who was able to get an interview, and fingers crossed for those who are still waiting on to hear back from schools. And when I got my interview, I felt a lot of relief, but I also felt a lot of stress because I was thinking about my answers and how I was going to make my answers stand out from everyone. And this is a question that I get frequently from students who are applying. And I really think that one way that you can make your answers stand out is by maximizing your personal experiences. So as Susan was alluding to before, you can try to incorporate personal experiences when possible, even when the question is not directly asking about a personal experience, to help support your answer. And I really think that sharing this information about yourself and things you've done, your characteristics, your skills, and your life experiences helps the interviewer to really remember you and for you to kind of build some sort of personal connection in the short amount of time you have in your interview. So when should you incorporate a personal experience? So I think it's really important to think about beyond the talk about a time you did this questions, and try to support some of your points with personal experiences. So even if you have some sort of policy question or something along those lines, and your solution to it is based on some kind of personal experience you have, like let's say it's something to do with the aging population and you have experience volunteering in a retirement home, you can draw on those personal experiences to help support your answer and help the interviewer get to know you better. And I think that the best way to really incorporate your answers is by drawing on some of the CanMEDS rules, which I'm going to talk about next. If you can go to the next slide, Kevin. Yeah, so specifically, I'm going to be talking about scholar, professional, and health advocate. So for the scholar role, this one's kind of an intimidating one, especially to me, because immediately the first thing that comes to my mind and comes to a lot of people's minds, I'm sure, is about research. And I had absolutely zero research experience applying to medical school out of my third year. So I did not have any of these experiences to draw on. So I urge you to think beyond research for the scholar role and think about other ways that you can show that you have this ability to learn, this motivation to keep pushing yourself and learning more information. So one of the ways I think about that is through self-learning skills. So for example, I play piano and I was primarily self-taught for a lot of years because I did not have a piano teacher in my hometown. So that's one way that I could draw on the scholar role to show that I have these characteristics. Same if you do any tutoring or teaching any sort of like coaching sports, like teaching a musical instrument, anything like that. That's sharing your expertise and your knowledge with people, which also really hits home on that scholar role. Next, for professional. So I think for professional, it's all about your ability to be accountable, to take responsibility for your actions. That's a big part about being professional. Time management, your ability to manage different things, know your own limitations, and not take on more than you can handle. Working through ethical issues. So if you did come across any times when you're working with different policies through different clubs or anything, the typical Casper, if you witness something, someone cheating, what did you do? Anything like that can show your professional abilities as well. And then lastly, respect for others. And this comes from showing respect for different viewpoints, anything like that, that can really hit on that professional role. And then lastly, I'm going to talk briefly about being a health advocate. So this was always a really intimidating role for me as well, because a lot of us don't necessarily have experience in something like public health or things in that aspect when you're directly advocating for people's health. But I think that the skills of advocating for someone can be in a different experiences and then applied to the healthcare setting. So if you have any experiences where you recognized a need in your community and you developed a solution to solve it. So even if you noticed there was a lack of children's sports in your community and you started some sort of program to help that. If you noticed there was a certain issue with access to healthy foods and you advocated for that. Anything along those lines really helps to get the advocate role across. Another thing is anything you've worked to do to address social determinants of health. So I urge you to really reflect on those social determinants of health and think about if you've worked with any populations who may be affected by social determinants of health. So this could be providing mentorship for students at your university who are from a lower socioeconomic status and may not have the same connections that other students do, or volunteer tutoring and offering guidance in that way. Anything that you've done to address some of the disparities that may be affecting someone's health is a really great thing to pull into the health advocate role. And then the last thing is standing up for others. And I think that this is a big thing that will come across in a lot of questions. And anytime that you notice that someone was in a position where they needed to be advocated for, whether that's a friend, whether that's a classmate, anyone that you stood up for, I think is a great personal experience as well. So that kind of sums up my thoughts on these CanMed roles. And I just really urge you to reflect on your personal experiences and think about the best way to showcase everything you've learned from them. So yeah, that concludes my little talk, and now I will take any questions.
Well, thank you, Kara, for that amazing introduction to the CanMed roles, especially these three very tough ones, especially, health advocate really trips people up, really does. And I just wanted to add to that, a big one during the COVID season was like, I advocated for a patient, I advocated for mask use. I mean, it could even take a public health role. It really can. All right. Who has questions for Kara? All right. You see the questions? Alexandra asks a question.
Yes.
And again, before you start, Kara, sorry, I'm gonna say everything we say is the personal experiences of our students. Okay, this isn't official information for any interview. This isn't official information for any school. All right.
Yeah, so yeah, you're correct, Alexandra. For the MMI at McMaster, it is 8 minutes. I would usually try to talk for 5 to 6 minutes, aim more for 5, and then there would usually be a follow-up question. So then I would have adequate time to answer the follow-up question. What I'm making sure I ensure considerations for teaching about BIPOC or larger bodies as a first aid instructor fall under health advocate. Yeah, I think you could definitely fit that under the health advocate, recognizing that that may be a way that people are having worse outcomes, worse health outcomes, and addressing that need. It's all about really how you deliver and how you phrase your experiences, in my opinion. So I definitely think that could work, Abby. How do you be story flexible? I'm not really sure what that means. Harsh, maybe you could elaborate, or unless you have any ideas, Kevin.
I'm assuming like what you mean is, what if they throw a question at you you've never heard, and you're like, oh
Yeah.
boy, what's the time? I had to disagree with a supervisor. I keep using that one, but it really comes down to doing a lot of questions, and then also looking at the CanMed's roles and having 3 stories per role, and you'll get this like big bank of questions, or like personal stories ready, and you'll be able to pull through once you have several per CanMed pillar, in my experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, like, if you need to take a couple seconds to gather your thoughts for the follow-up question, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, like, I'm just going to take a couple seconds to reflect on this, gather your thoughts, and then go from there. So that's another way to just buy yourself a couple extra seconds before you go into answering. Can you reuse examples from your essays? Definitely. As far as I know, no med school in Canada has like an open file and has all your essays and everything on hand during the interview. So feel free to share those personal experiences again. How would I go about using the 2 minutes of prep time effectively? So during my 2 minutes of prep time, I first of all made sure I really read the question closely and wasn't missing any factors in the question. That's a big thing I've noticed doing prep with people too. Sometimes you get a really long question and it can be difficult to make it through and pick out all the little details in it. So really making sure you're being cognizant of that. And then I would try to kind of lay out the big points in my answer. So I had a structure that I would try to follow for different types of questions, and I would try to just pull out the big points that I was going to talk about. You don't have enough time in 2 minutes to perfectly curate all the things you're going to say. So for me, it was about having the general structure, the things I wanted to get through, and then within the like when I started talking, then I'd just fill in the blanks and add ideas as I went on. How do you navigate picking a weakness that is not a red flag, but is also a true weakness? So I think Susan was talking about this a little bit before, but I think it kind of comes down to picking something you do struggle with and have seen negative effects with, but something that you are working on and have concrete strategies that you can and are using to improve on this. And of course, that it's not something that's like super harmful as a physician. So like, for example, I wouldn't say something like my weakness is that I don't have empathy, right? Because empathy is a really important characteristic for a physician. So just be cognizant of that, I guess. Should we have a thorough understanding of the Canadian healthcare system? I think it is important to have a good breadth of knowledge related to issues like facing the Canadian healthcare system, like the primary care shortage, rural health, Indigenous health, AI, all those topics. I'm not saying you need to be an expert with things, but the more background knowledge you have, the better you'll be able to critically analyze questions and provide a more thorough response. Do we need to come up with a single unique personal story per bullet point for each CanMed role? I mean, you could if you wanted to. Personally, I did not do that. I think it's more about just reflecting on the characteristics that they're trying to bring through with those roles and just being able to do lots of practice questions to pull on different personal experiences and being prepared in that way. I think that would be really daunting to try to come up with a personal experience for every single bullet point of every single CanMeds role. But then again, if you have the time and feel like that would be a beneficial way for you to reflect on your own personal experiences, that might be something that works for you. What are some entry-level positions within healthcare to start gaining experiences? Um, I personally did not have any like clinical healthcare roles on my application. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this one, Kevin, or if you've answered below, but as far as entry-level positions.
So what was the question? Entry level positions for what?
Within healthcare to start gaining experience.
Well, okay, so there's several things you can do. I mean, one thing is just go to your hospital and volunteer. They'll try to put you in the gift shop. Please don't let them put you in the gift shop. Okay, that's just not a real thing. It just really isn't. I mean, I'm gonna be blunt. But again, most schools, I mean, in Canada, they understand. I mean, a lot of people do end up at the gift shop. Try to be in a more like patient-facing role. I remember once I was in the ER, I was handing out coffee. It was fine. I was handing out coffee, but it's just more patient-facing. I just think gift shop's kind of funny. But then I really started stepping it up. I reached out to a family doctor and I'm like, hey, can I volunteer at your place? No, there you go. I'm volunteering at a family doctor's place. Okay. I'm just getting their blood pressure and asking them a few questions. Hey, here, start writing soap notes. I mean, it's really about reaching out, finding cool volunteer spots. A lot of hospitals. I mean, I grew up in like the Vaughan area, so Mackenzie Health has a lot of great. You can be in the surgery room, actually talking to patients, making sure they're all right. Helping them move around, ambulate them, right? So, I think that's the best way in Canada. If that's a U.S. question, then you might have to try to get some shadowing hours in, whatever way you can. But I can answer that at the end if that was a U.S. question.
Great, thanks, Kevin. I feel like I've answered the health topics question next, so I'm going to leave that one. How many questions do they typically ask in the interview? I would say that's very school dependent. For Mac and for Calgary, the two schools I interviewed at, they had 8 different stations, but they had a different number of follow-up questions. So it depends school to school. The role of scholar and medical expert sound really similar. Can you differentiate between the two, please? For me, the main difference is that when you're applying to medical school, you're not supposed to be a medical expert. Even as a physician, it's really hard to be a medical expert. And that's why the medical expert is kind of in the center, right? Because when you're applying to medical school, they want to see you have all the skills around that's going to allow you to be a medical expert. So I think with scholar, it's more about your general ability to learn, your desire to learn, and like teaching, all those kinds of aspects, and those will allow you to hopefully one day achieve the role of a medical expert. Can you share some more examples for professionalism? Would it involve discussing situation de-escalation, or would that fall more under the communication role? Yeah,
And
I
Carol,
think like
your last question. Sorry, we'll let this be the last question before we get going.
sounds good. Yeah. So I think for professionalism and communication, of course, go hand in hand, in my opinion. But for professionalism, I would say this is things like remaining composed, being able to follow different policies and procedures, and just like, I guess, like, for example, like if you're in a customer service role and you have to like tell a customer they're not able to go through a refund, you can do this in a professional way. I think the professionalism could come off of that, but you could also be hitting on some of the communication and collaboration things as well within that. So I do think a lot of the roles are intertwined for sure.
All right, y'all. And with that, a big thank you to Kara for joining and telling us how to approach these really tough can meds roles, how to integrate them into your interviews. Now, again, let me just what in the world is going on, y'all? Okay, so again, Kara is also a medical student on our platform. She's very popular, as you can see. If you want to talk with Kara some more, you can go check her out on our website. Just go to thebrightdoc.com, click admission here, right here. You can just search up Kara. And yeah, I'm just showing you how to get here, and you can talk to her like this, okay? If you had any questions, just ask them in the future. But at the end, I'm going to try to answer all your guys' questions like before I leave personally. Kara just has to leave because we only pay her for a certain time. But also, I just got a message that some of you guys have been booking consultants like right now. Like some of you guys just booked Susan. Please message them first before booking, okay? Just make sure you message them to like figure out a good time, okay? That's about it. So message them before booking. All right. Thank you, Kara. And good luck on your studies. Thanks for joining us tonight. And again, we don't charge tax on our consultants. You pay in Canadian dollars if you wish. And there's zero platform fee, zero booking fee per person. Now, let's have Joy on board. Hi, Joy. Joy is a medical student at the University of Ottawa. So, up north in Ontario. And she's going to be joining us to talk about the various interview formats. But not only that, but also an introduction to health policy, I believe. Right, Joy?
Yes, that's correct. Bernice will be covering more of the health policy, and I'll focus a bit more on the interview formats. But yeah, okay, let's get started. So yeah, hi everyone, my name is Joy. I hope that you're all you had a good weekend and you're having a good Sunday. So just a general overview of what I'll be discussing. I want to talk about the different kinds of formats that you may have. So the first one being the multiple mini interview, or MMI. And I'll talk about both synchronous and asynchronous. Obviously, there's a difference between them, and maybe even a little bit of a difference in terms of how you can best prepare. And then I'll move on to talking about like panel, which is like the most traditional interview. And then just know, I won't explicitly talk about this, but just know that some medical schools do have like a mix of both. So an example would be like where they have an MMI format. So you have stations, but at each station you have like more than one interviewer. And Queen's University, just as an example, they do an MMI first for like part 1, and then they do a panel for part 2. At least that's how it was as of last year when I applied and interviewed at Queen's. And yeah, just a general thing, I interviewed at Queen's, the University of British Columbia, and U Ottawa, obviously. So U Ottawa was a panel, UBC was MMI, and for Queen's, it was MMI for the first stage. So that's kind of my experience. For each of the interview formats, I'm going to talk more about what it actually entails and how to best prepare for each one, and also what kind of advantages each one has from an applicant standpoint. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's begin by talking about a synchronous multiple mini interview. So this is when, by synchronous, I just mean that you are there and the interviewer is also there. So it's kind of like in real time, and you can actually see the interviewer's face, you can interact with them. So it is the most common medical school interview format. So just some examples of medical schools that currently adopt this approach are UBC, McMaster, MUN, and then there's so many more. And then there's other schools that have a version similar to MMI. So the general thing about MMI is that there's different stations. Kara was talking about how some of them have like 8 stations, like for McMaster. UBC had around 10 stations, and then different ones. There's just a lot of variability. Each station can be like 5 to 10 minutes in length. And there's also variability in terms of like the initial response time. So I know for some medical schools, you have more time to answer that initial question. And then for other medical schools, you just have like 2 to 3 minutes, and the rest of the station is for conversation or for the interviewer to ask you follow-up questions. That kind of leads into my next point about in terms of preparation. The best way to prepare is to have a very good understanding of the medical school that you're interviewing at and the specific format that they're going to be having. So I distinctly remember for UBC, they did break it down very clearly, and for you, Ottawa. But if you ever have any questions, you can always email to ask. So some things that you can ask about if they don't already mention it in your like interview invite email is knowing how much time you have to prepare for that first question of each station, how much time you have to respond to that initial question. Some interviewers may actually cut you off for the first question, so just keep that in mind. And whether the rest of the station is like follow-up based or if it's just you responding and the interviewer just kind of listening. So they're just things to keep in mind. And even when you're preparing with people, perhaps if you're going to be meeting with consultants on the Bright Doctor platform, you can kind of inform them of the different changes that they've had in the process. And that's something that I did as well last year. And then what I would do actually is no matter what time they give you for the thinking time, I would actually practice with less time. This is something that I did for all of my interviews, and it was just for me to kind of get more comfortable having less time to think and less time to prepare, so that when I'm in the interview, like I know I'm going to get nervous, maybe my mind will wander somehow. So I got used to having less time anyways, and I could take that last 10 to 15 seconds to essentially just calm down and prepare to enter and meet the interviewer. And then the other piece of advice that I have is to really know the most common types of stations based on maybe like a medical student's advice, like one of the medical students that has attended that medical school or interviewed there. So I would kind of ask around and get an idea of like what they generally like to talk about, or the different topics or the different types of stations. Be aware that for some medical schools as well, they may have completely different stations and may not even just be questions. It could also be a task. So I know for U Calgary, one of my friends interviewed there, and there are some things where you have to like actually do something in the room. So just keep that in mind as well. And what I would do next, once I know the different types of stations, I would try to build a framework. So I actually had key phrases or some sort of structure that I would have for different types of stations. So for example, if I knew it was going to be a philosophical type question, or maybe like analyzing a quote or something along those lines, then I had a structure for that, and I would practice applying it to different things. This personally worked for me. For some people, you may find that having a structure makes you more monotone. So I would experiment with different structures in the beginning of your preparatory phase and then see what works best for you. And then my last piece of advice for MMI is to record yourself responding to various question types or various station types. And this is very important because when you play back the recording, you'll see exactly what works for you. You can also pick up on some tendencies. So for example, when I think, I tend to look up a lot. So that was one thing I noticed, and just certain things like that. So you can really perfect for each type of station, and that will improve your score overall for the MMI. So some advantages overall from an applicant standpoint is that generally speaking in MMI, the benefit is that you have different interviewers for every single station. And they have a lot of statistics on this, but it somehow improves or makes sure that the test scores are like reliable when they're assessing you, because they have different people assessing you. So this can actually be working in your favor, because that means that you can reuse compelling stories that you've used in past stations. And that's something I did a lot. It's kind of similar to Casper. So I did that a lot in interviews as well. And I didn't have to worry about the interviewer feeling like I was repeating myself, because it's a different person. The other benefit, and something that will come in handy when you're kind of nervous during the interview, is the fact that, when you're done one station, regardless of how you performed, you're going to be able to start fresh with the next station. So really take that to your advantage as well. Take the time to just kind of brush off the previous station. So don't think that if you did well, you can kind of cruise throughout the rest of the interview. But also, if you didn't do as well as you wanted, don't take that too seriously. Move on. There's a reason why they have multiple stations. It allows for you to have those kinds of errors here and there. Next slide, please. Okay, and then for asynchronous multiple mini interview, it's very similar to the synchronous, except now you're not really speaking to a real interviewer. So you're essentially talking at a screen. So an example of that would be U of T, which has the modified personal interview, MPI. And from my knowledge, at least as of last year, they had 4 questions and you're talking to a screen, and it's not really like there's no interaction and you're just speaking and answering the question. Queens for part 1 also has the same style. So preparation is very similar to traditional MMI. So you're going to be doing everything that I mentioned before. So I won't spend time going through it again. One thing I will say though, specifically to asynchronous MMI, I found, for example, for myself, that I would sometimes become more monotone as I continued my response because I didn't have facial feedback from the interviewer because there is no interviewer. And so because of that, I practice recording myself and I practice maintaining a level of expressivity in my tone and just in my facial expressions, in my nonverbal cues. So it's really important to not drop all of those things just because there's no person that is sitting right in front of you. And yeah, that's like the main piece of advice that I have for that. So just preparing, also preparing, answering questions that require you to answer for longer periods of time, because traditionally with asynchronous MMI, since you don't have an interviewer, you don't really have as much follow-up. So you're responding for a longer period of time. And for a lot of students, that can be more uncomfortable because they have to talk for longer. So just make sure that you're practicing doing that. And then in terms of some advantages, I actually kind of liked with Queens, for example, how, you don't really get the interviewer feedback. So if they don't have a desirable reaction towards what you've said, you are not really going to get thrown off by that. And the other thing is you could also still reuse compelling stories, assuming that each station is still reviewed independently of each other or by independent interviewers. Then that still applies to asynchronous MMI. Next slide, please. Okay, and lastly for panel interview. So some examples of this would be like Western or Ottawa or part 2 of the Queen's interview, and then there's some others as well. So this is the traditional interview format, and this actually should inform your preparation, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So usually it can be more than one interviewer for the duration of the interview, and there's no more stations, so it's longer. So my U Ottawa interview lasted approximately 40 minutes or maybe like a little bit over 40 minutes in length. So it can be up to an hour. So I've heard of students going over the hour, so just keep that in mind. And because it's more than one interviewer, also know that, usually they're taking turns asking questions and then the rest are listening, taking notes, etc. So it can be more conversational, I would say, compared to MMI, because, at least from my experience, like other interviewers can chime in and ask you different questions based on what you're saying, and you can kind of continue your train of thought. But just know that they still have set questions, so it's not a completely like free-flowing conversation. So when you're responding, try to keep your responses to maybe like 2 to 3 minutes, I would say like max 3 minutes during the actual response time. So don't just take all the time that you want, kind of like with potentially like some MMIs. So in terms of preparation, because it's a traditional interview, you should be having solid responses for traditional questions. So traditional questions could be things like, why medicine and why not some other kind of healthcare career, and just like basically more traditional things that you can think of, or tell me about yourself. All those things are more likely to come up, I would say, in panel versus in station-based MMI. The other thing is I really put a lot of emphasis for like U Ottawa, for example, or just like any kind of panel interview to understand the unique mission or goals of that medical school, maybe like their philosophy of teaching, their philosophy behind how they structure their medical school curriculum, because it can give you some insight into what they're going to be looking for in applicants, potentially even what questions they may ask. So I would just do my research about the school, about the city, and just keep those things in mind as well. And then my last piece of advice is to try and practice with a panel if you can. I actually didn't end up doing this and it still worked out. So this is not by any means, you know, like the be all end all, but if you can practice with a panel, you can kind of just get that feeling for it if you're someone who tends to get nervous if there's like a bunch of people kind of staring at you as you talk. And then in terms of advantages or considerations, what I actually liked is you really get to build more of a rapport with the interviewers because it's just a longer period of time. I was able to throw a few jokes here and there, and you know they kind of remembered me more because of that. I would say you can also create a more compelling or more holistic and complete kind of view of who you are as an applicant because they're kind of with you for the entire time, so they can actually follow your train of thought and like get a good idea of who you are. So use that to your advantage. And that brings me to my last point. Because you're with a panel, you can't really reuse the same story. So I would actually use that to my advantage and share different stories to share different sides of who I am, rather than like kind of sticking to a certain set of experiences that I'm only comfortable speaking about. I kind of opened up about different things. I still prepared for these, by the way. Like I didn't just say anything that came to my mind, but just showing different sides of who I am as an applicant to give them the best idea and most holistic idea possible. And yeah, so that is all of the tips that I have. I would also say that, you know, I did use the Bright Doctor for a lot of their questions, like the question banks. And I found those to be really helpful in the feature of like recording yourself on the platform. So that is one thing that I would recommend. If you're looking for other resources, you can go on Reddit to look at different question types and things like that. Yeah, okay, so I can start by answering some of the questions. Oh, there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, great to the questions. Awesome.
Okay, so one question by Japchi, did you have a particular framework that you used when answering questions? Yes, I did have some frameworks. Again, this depends on whether it makes you sound more monotone or not. For me, it actually helped kind of ease the stress. So I had, you know, frameworks for like philosophical based questions. What if it's a personal question? So I'll give you an example. If it's a personal question, I use the STAR format. So like situation, task, action, result, reflection, and then I kind of added another one, which is connection to medicine. So you can do your own research into that format as well. And this is kind of how I structured a lot of my personal based questions. And yeah, I tried to have that for different question types just so I was ready no matter what they threw at me. But I also prepared for random questions that it's really hard to have a structure to. So if that came up, and it does come up in interviews, what I would do is I still try to have some kind of structure to my response by saying to the interviewer, first I'll discuss this, then I'll discuss this, this, this. And that was just for me to kind of also keep track of what I was going to say to the interviewer. So that's another thing that you can do as well. Okay, and second question, is a panel interview in real life? This depends on the medical school. Some medical schools will invite you in person and other ones will be online. So for me, for U Ottawa, as of last year, it was online. Okay, is there an audience? So I'm assuming this is for panel. So like you just have the interviewers, there's no one else in the room except you and the interviewers. Okay, sorry, you may have mentioned this just a second ago. Is it common to have traditional questions in MMI style interview? So for my personal experience, no. Just as a short answer, it doesn't mean that it cannot come up. It could come up, but I find that with MMI, each station has a specific goal in mind, and it's usually based on a specific question. And just from my experience, at least with like UBC, for example, or Queens, they just never really like touched on that very directly. So I would prepare more for it when it comes to traditional interviews. But in general, I would say that you should try to have a very clear understanding of why you want medicine before doing any interview, because that will just give you more clarity as you go into the interview. I just didn't find it was that much of a focus in MMI. Okay, do all schools use the same types of stations in the MMI? Definitely not. So different medical schools will have different things. There are some overlap. So I would say that majority of MMI will have a lot of health policy based questions. Some will have like more ethics and situational based, kind of like McMaster, whereas others will stray away from like situational based and kind of like what would you do type thing and focus more on health policy. So like UBC, I found it was just like more health policy specific in my opinion. And in terms of what are the main types of stations to prepare for, so I would definitely talk to like, you know, medical students at that medical school to see what is actually more high yield for that specific interview, because it can vary widely between medical schools. So anything I say will only apply to the schools I've interviewed with at. Okay, if you have lower grades / MCAT, should you talk about it and say how you plan to overcome it, or is it best to avoid it? That's a really good question, Miriam. I would say it really depends on how you can explain or kind of how your response will go. If you have a solid way that you can show that you've overcome the lower grades and it's not like an ongoing thing and you haven't had any tangible work done or you haven't had any tangible results in improving them, I would stay away from that. But if you can show that, like, I know I had lower grades in the past, or you can kind of show as part of your story and like as a challenge that you did overcome and are still working to overcome, my personal advice would be that's okay. So it really all just depends on what the situation is and like how you say it. So if you're going to be talking about any challenge, any struggle in your life, my personal advice is to show some evidence that you've already started tackling that challenge, that weakness of yours, whatever it is, rather than just stating it and only speaking theoretically about the future. I hope that answers your question. Okay, did you repeat your essay stories for panel? Oh, that's a really good question, Minnie. So one important point for some medical schools, they will have what's called an open file, and then other ones will have closed file. So I believe U Ottawa was open file, and they do mention this. It just means that the interviewers have access to your file, and they have like a one-page summary or something. So they already have an idea of who you are as an applicant. And this is important because it doesn't mean that you shouldn't talk about anything on that one-page summary. I still think you should talk about them, but it also means that you can kind of go into more depth about them, and just keep in mind that they've already read that, so you can maybe give them different sides of who you are as well. So it just depends on the medical school, and they should tell you. I see a hand up from John. John, can you hear me? Oh, okay, the hand has gone away. Okay, Sarah asked, how do you signpost and adequately summarize your answers? I sometimes did this in MMI if I had the time, but I would say like how you do it, I would just say like, so as I mentioned, I believe that XYZ. And that was like a very quick thing. I did not spend a lot of time on the summary. I will say that with MMI, at least for UBC, because they have follow-ups, you don't really get a chance to go back to your initial question and do a summary. You've already moved on from that topic. For panel, sometimes if it was a more complex question that they asked me, I would do a very quick summary at the end. In terms of like just once you leave with an MMI each station, I made sure to thank the interviewer for their time. With panel, same thing. Also for panel, have 2 to 3 questions prepared, because panel members usually, like, just out of respect, they will ask the applicant, oh, do you have any questions for us? So I always think it's a good idea to have questions prepared about their medical school, their program, the city, like anything. So just keep that in mind as well. And that could also leave a good impression at the end. Newer, different station. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Can I add to that? That was I love that point. That learn a little bit about the medical school. Guys, wherever you're interviewing, research their clinical sites, where you can rotate, what cool electives you can take. Because imagine you got like a question on some underserved population. You're like, oh, whoa, I'm interviewing at Ottawa. Hey, I heard you can rotate at this regional satellite campus, and boom, boom, I get to work with these populations. So that was such a good point by Joy.
Yes, and actually I did do that for my questions as well. Like to ask my question, I would usually first say something that I already knew about U Ottawa as a medical school, about the programs they have, and my follow-up pertained to that, to show that I am genuinely interested in attending U Ottawa. And I think it did leave a good impression as well. Okay, I also have a question from Noor, similar to another question. So again, just to reiterate, ask an upper year or like someone at that medical school to know the different station types specifically. Some examples are health policy ones, situational or ethic-based ones, where they ask you what you would do in that situation. Personal questions, such as like describe a time when you overcame a challenge, things like that. You could also have random questions that I can't even describe because they're completely random. So yeah, just talk to upper years and you'll be able to get more clarification on that. Angelique, could you explain a bit more how Queens ask follow-up questions if it's asynchronous? So I don't believe they ask any follow-up because, again, there is no interviewer. Sometimes they will have you record the first part of the question and then have a follow-up question that you record separately, but it's not a real person asking you the question. It's automated and the questions are already set up. Okay, Nardine, does this mean that panel interview is more personalized where they can ask you questions
And this will be the
from
last
your
one, Joy.
CV? Yep, sure. Or personal experience, but in MMI is more generalized questions. I wouldn't really say so. I would say they can make MMI also personalized by asking you personal questions as well. But with panel, they will remember what you said because they were with you for the whole time. So just try to give them different sides of yourself versus for MMI, you can reuse the same story. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
All right. And
Thank
with
you,
that,
everyone.
very big thank you to Joy. You know, she's a wonderful, wonderful help, and she's been to many of our sessions. So thank you for sharing your perspectives, Joy, and answering all our students' questions. Joy is also a consultant. You can check out our platform. I think she has the most reviews of anybody, but you can check her out. And, you know, obviously medical students are busy, so, you know, pick your favorite medical student if you wish to work with them on our platform. And again, we don't charge tax, Canadian dollar, no booking fees per session. But now let's welcome Bernice. Thank you, Joy. Bernice is a first-year medical student at Queen's University. This is one of the most elusive universities. I mean, no one knows how you get an interview. Well, I mean, it used to be the case. Now it's like a lottery bird. Again, I'm 2 years removed now, but it's very elusive. And she's here to talk to us about, you know, what helps her not only get past the MMI stage, but also, you know, the second round of interviews. I mean, she's the master interviewer. Hi, Bernice.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us. I'll mute myself. I'll let you take this show.
Sounds good. Okay, so hi again. Thank you for the great introduction. My name is Bernice. I'm currently a first-year medical student at Queen's, and a bit about my background. I did my undergrad at Western in physiology and pharmacology, and yeah, super excited to be here today. So what I'll be talking about is focused on healthcare issues and how to prepare for them. So a lot of people, when they start preparing for this session, they get super overwhelmed and thinking how, oh, like I don't usually watch the news. It's really hard to stay informed, especially with our busy schedules as an undergraduate. And I totally resonate with that. And even right now in med school, it's really hard to keep up with the trend on what's going on in the healthcare field. But something to reassure all of you is that I personally actually find this session or these type of questions to be the most easiest to prepare. And once you prepare for these questions, a lot of the questions are just, they just kind of come naturally to you and there are no surprises. So taking a look at the slide I have here, I summarized a bunch of topics that I personally find to be almost like high yield. These are things that you definitely have to know. And if any of you here are already preparing for interviews, try to make sure that these are things that you know what they are. It's not a new term to you. I remember before I was preparing, I didn't know what MAID is. And like up until like 2 weeks before my interview, and I was like kind of stressed about it. So these are like remember to know like these acronyms and also just like bigger words like xenotransplantation, like what is that? So just knowing a little bit of background about these sorts of topics. Now, moving on to tips and resources. My very first one is, again, stay updated. It's never too late to start. And because like right now, we have so many resources out there to help us. I personally really like listening to podcasts. And if any of you have any questions about like what type of podcasts I recommend, you can ask in the Q&A session. There are already a lot out there. You can probably find a lot of recommendations on Reddit as well. And not only podcasts, you can also do like YouTube videos, even TikTok, just like, I don't know, going on the news, like watching TV, or even just talking to friends. I think it's a really good place to start. And moving on to the second one, stats are optional. So I remember when I was preparing, I was very stressed out because I was going on Discord and practicing with other people. And a lot of students have like different stats memorized, like they know what is the percentage of like indigenous populations, how many percentage of physicians are burnt out. And I was just really like the imposter syndrome was hitting me. Like I don't know any of these stats. But one thing to tell you is that it's a great thing to include in your interview response. But if you don't have them, or if you happen to see a question that you just can't tell a stat to the interviewer, that is completely fine. And honestly, like most people don't have stats memorized in their minds, and it kind of just shows that you're just a human. You're not a robot that can just regurgitate stats out of nowhere. So if you have them, it's great, but if you don't, that's also fine. Now, moving on to the third one, demonstrate empathy, which I think a lot of you already know. And this is important, especially when it comes to more maybe political things that you might have a bias in already. And it might be difficult if for things like, I don't know, like abortion. Maybe you already have a, like what is it called, like a conception of what is good and what is bad in your mind, but try to when you're answering the questions, make sure that you don't show that side right off the bat, show your biases, because that can come off as a red flag. So make sure that you're being non-judgmental. And the fourth one is using personal experience, which a lot of people kind of forget when it comes to these sorts of like healthcare policy questions. Even though we might not be politicians ourselves, there can still be experiences that may be related to the question that they're asking. So an example that I have personally is that when I was in high school, I went to a volunteer trip to some rural areas in Nepal. And even though I wasn't doing anything that's medically related there, like that experience was really empowering to me, seeing how rural areas around the world are like. So having any sorts of experience is always great. Now, the last one is practice. So again, there are lots of resources and many people out there who you can practice with. I personally use the Bright Doctor, and I find it super helpful. And as a lot of other panelists have said already, really great function of how you can record yourself and also having feedback given to you as well, like not based on your response, but just like general feedback. What are some things that you can include, and what are some things that you probably should avoid saying? And yeah, I use the Discord group chats, practicing with friends, and back at Western, I also had career services in our university, so a careers department that we can practice with professionals, and I also found the MMI prep that they offer to be really, really helpful. I think I have a next slide. Yeah. Thank you. So, so this slide covers what you can talk about in a question that asks for healthcare policies. So first, as mentioned already, like pros and cons, and there are different values that you can talk about. So things like equity, efficiency, patient-centered care, and managing the different limited resources we have, which can be time, financial resources, personnel, all sorts of different things we have in a healthcare system. And there are lots more different perspectives that you can talk about. So thinking from different stakeholders' perspectives, such as the patients, healthcare providers, community members, the government, and etc. And then comparing and contrasting with other countries. This part is also kind of optional. If you have that sort of knowledge in mind, it shows cultural competency. It's just something nice you can include, but again, depends on what question you're getting, and balancing and coming to like a compromise is also important. And this is also the part where you can show your academic skills, even though it might not be as personal as other questions that they're asking. You can show that in a very difficult situation where you have to balance different perspectives, showing that you can work with other different people, other healthcare professionals, shows that you have great collaboration skills. And this is just one example. And how you can advocate for different people in the community also shows that you can be a great health advocate. And last but not least, your opinion. And yeah, just different values that are important to you is something that you can highlight on. And so I forgot to include this in this slide, but one thing that I also kind of want to talk about when it comes to these healthcare policy questions, one thing that I find to be really helpful is to have a structure for myself, so which applies to all sorts of healthcare policy questions. And I always start with a short little introduction and summarizing the question. And then diving a little bit about the background. So for example, if it's a question about Indigenous healthcare, if it's something that I've already prepared, I can talk about some statistics that I know already, or talking about like the different systemic racism that people of these populations are facing. Then I dive in to talk about the different challenges. So things like healthcare disparities, discrimination, so on and so forth. And then I move on and talk about the different solutions. So solutions from different perspectives, such as physicians, what governments can do, and partnering with Indigenous community members as well. And then last but not least, I can include a personal experience if I have any. So that's just a very general, like overarching scheme of how I structure my responses. And you don't necessarily have to follow what I'm doing, but just something that you can reference on. And yeah, I can start taking up questions.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bernice. Let's check the chat. Let's start at like Cheyenne, or no, Sahar, Ishan, who just messaged. Okay, what are some podcast recommendations?
Sure, yeah. So one of the bigger ones that I think a lot of you know already is White Coat Black Art. I personally find that to be really interesting and also just really easy to like absorb as a person who doesn't have a public health background or any sorts of like healthcare ethics background. Some of them are pretty long, but I tend to choose the ones that are under 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So like when I'm walking to school, I find it really easy to just like listen to it passively. Sometimes when I listen to podcasts that are a little bit more new to me, I have a note, like in my notes app, I have like a note open up where I can just write down pieces of information that I think, oh, it might be interesting to include in my interview response. But that's, again, completely optional. You can listen to it as passively or as actively as you want. And the second one that I recommend, I think not a lot of people know about this. It's called the Nocturnus. And this one's a little bit different. It doesn't teach you specifically about what type of healthcare issues that's going on, and doesn't help you with like following the trend of like the different healthcare stuff. But it's really different from all the other podcasts that I've listened to. So the Nocturnus focus on coming from a fit physician's perspective about the different cases that they see in a healthcare setting. So maybe talking to one specific patient that their story really surprises them or something that really sticks out to them. I think this is very helpful because as, well, I'm a medical student now, but before when I was a pre-med, I honestly like had no idea how the minds of doctors work. And that podcast really helped me understand, oh, like what are the different challenges that they face and the interactions between the patients. So yeah, and through those interactions, it's also very helpful in learning about the different healthcare systems, like healthcare issues. Yeah, hope that answers your question.
Asks, oh, and Nagar asks, do you recommend citing stats?
Citing stats? I think it's also optional, and I guess it also depends on where you see them. So for me personally, sometimes I don't always include stats because sometimes if I just see it like off of Instagram or like a random TikTok that I see, I don't know how reliable they are. So I would tend to not cite them and like not even talk about them as a whole, like in case if the stat is completely wrong, that'll just be embarrassing. But if it's something that I have learned in class, I know it's right, and I feel confident about talking it, I think it'll be nice to cite your stats. But yeah, I think that's also just a personal preference.
JapG asks, if following the framework you mentioned, how many points should we discuss for a 2-minute response?
Sorry, following the framework, how many, sorry, do you mind repeating?
If following the framework you mentioned, how many points should we discuss for a 2-minute response? And I mean, I think you're going to say it's just, you're not trying to stuff as many points. You want to go into depth and explain your thinking.
Yeah, I agree. If it's only a 2-minute response, it's definitely tricky because if you want to give like a bit of background and then dive into like following my framework, right? Background, challenges, solutions, and personal experience, that will be really tight and you have to be super concise. If yeah, if it's only like a 2-minute response, I might cut out of the personal experience part if it's not part of the question, and just focus more on challenges and solutions. And I guess the very intro part, I probably wouldn't even like try to reframe the question or like summarize and give a background, because I'm guessing if it's a 2-minute response, they want us to be concise, clear, and straight to the point.
Thank you. I'm skipping the repeat questions. Alex asks, do you feel like the follow-up questions for Queen's async MMI were pretty intuitive? Did any catch you off guard? Listen, I'm gonna just preface this. We're all under NDAs, okay? So she can't specifically mention the exact questions she received, right? But Bernice, if you want to talk about it more generally.
Yeah, sure. So I think Joy also talked about it earlier on. The follow-up question you get is not personal. It's already preset to you. To my memory, because honestly, I don't remember the questions I got, but I think they're a very fair game. Sometimes if they ask you, like, I don't know, like if they ask you about, they give you like a healthcare scenario or like a healthcare issue, in the follow-up question, they might give you like an additional piece of information and then ask you what your thoughts are, or like ask you like a personal experience. Yeah, but I don't think it was, I want to say don't stress too much about it, because like I think to my memory it's very short, and like they make it very clear on what they want you to answer. And yeah, I don't even remember if you get extra time to like think about the follow-up, but yeah, it was just like very short and it's related to the previous part already. I hope that answers your question.
All right, Bernice, just 1 or 2 more questions and we'll let you go. It's up to you, just whatever you read.
Sure. Okay, sorry, I'm seeing a lot of questions. Okay, to no particular order, I'm just gonna read out anything that I see. It's called White Coat Black Art and The Nocturnist. I know a lot of people are like trying to figure out what which one it is. Do I recommend bringing up current news related to healthcare? Yeah, like if you know about it, I think it's something great to do, because it shows that you're staying informed. Yeah. Okay, this is kind of unrelated. Do I recommend doing Phys Farm at Western as a pre-med? I personally really liked it. I thought it was it's a really great program. I love the content, and it's a lot more in-depth than first and second year. Do I feel like?
All right.
Yeah, okay.
And with that, everybody, please give a big thank you to Bernice for coming along. Special representation from Queens. I mean, it's quite amazing. Bernice, unfortunately, is not a consultant on our platform. I mean, if you guys email us, we can bug her, but she likes to keep her peace. But thank you, Bernice. And let's get to the next section. Oh yeah, I just wanted to show y'all. By the way, if you guys are booking people, please message them first, because they might have had too many bookings by now. Okay, I just wanted to show you what we're talking about when we say these webinars. Okay, so you go to past webinars once you sign in. Boom, they're all free. Don't have to pay for these. All right, check out TMU's Goes Crazy, guys. Check this one out. Okay. Also, Queens Goes Crazy. So if you're interviewing at Queens, check this one out. It's free. All right. And other than that, these are the mini banks people are talking about. So when Joy was talking about recording herself, like, this is on a free account. So there's 10 free questions, but it's over 100 just on the MMI bank. And you can create a test, choose your categories, tell me about yourself. Here's the thing. You're recording yourself, finish. And the beautiful part is we have, expert model answers from medical students, ideas to go beyond, red flags to avoid. And there's several answers now for our personal questions. So you can see how different medical students have been answering these personal questions, okay? And yeah, then again, how do you think scientific research should be used to inform and improve public health policy? Begin, response, finish. You can see the answers there, home. And when we say Ontario Health Policy Bank, these say 0 questions because it's not paid. But yeah, 30 questions here, and so on and so forth. All right. Okay. Let's get back to it. Okay, Sarah. Welcome, Sarah. She's a first-year medical student at the University of Toronto. New to our team and, you know, our team of consultants. And she'll be talking about crafting your personal stories, okay? So welcome, Sarah.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing very, very well. Thank you for joining us. I mean, University of Toronto, a lot of y'all just got interviews there. They do 3 batches. This is, you know, a tough pickle. Very, very nerve-wracking interview for many people. So Sarah is hopefully going to help us hopefully relieve some of that stress on you, but definitely will help us tackle this personal story questions.
Yeah, so I'll be talking about personal stories. I feel like this was actually one of my strengths, and so I'd love to give you some tips on it. So the first thing I personally did for my interviews was I created a blank document and just made a list of all the major activities and events in my life that were meaningful. And after I made that list, I tried to think of what I learned from each. Usually, these meaningful activities have multiple takeaways, so there's probably more than one lesson you learn from each. So, making this list is very important when you're answering questions or practicing. You can refer back to that list and see which one applies to it. Building on that, the second tip is to find a list of qualities that are important for being for a physician, and the CanMeds is one great source where they actually listed multiple different roles that are important, such as communication, collaboration leader, etc. And this will help you kind of complete that list you initially made. You can go through each of these roles and think of which of those activities you listed fit into each role. For example, if just think whether you have a good example when you're an advocate, a good example when you're a leader. And if you don't, think of something and add it to your list. So that will kind of help you fill in some gaps for that list that you have. And then my third tip is think of the negatives, and this is really useful. Negatives are basically for me were when were you not an advocate? Go through that CanMeds roles. When were you not, and when did you not do those roles? When were you not a good communicator? When were you not a good collaborator? These are some very tough questions sometimes to think of on the spot, and just being prepared for them is very useful. So when you're trying to answer this, make sure that you're not talking about something unethical or something that's really bad, because that will of course look very, very bad on you. But try to be honest. Think of a time when you didn't display that role, and you should have a game plan or talk about a plan about how you basically worked on that skill and ultimately improved. So that's how you would answer those questions. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, I had more tips.
Are we missing one of your slides?
Yeah.
Huh.
I can just say them if you don't have them on there.
Sorry about that, Sarah.
No worries, no
Was there
worries.
like a bullet list of tips?
Yeah, so there were 2 slides that I sent you.
I remember that. Okay, our administrator will get those on in a sec. Just answer some.
Okay.
Sorry, if you can answer some questions for now while we get that fixed.
Yeah, sure. I can answer questions. Which ones can I start with? Oh, okay, there's one for Toronto. In your prep for Toronto's interview, how did you divide your time between researching health policy, preparing for ethical scenarios, and then personal questions? I definitely, for health policies, I did a lot of research. I think Susan mentioned a bunch of ways to do research on different health policies, and that was definitely important. I did similar things, podcasts and making a list of ethical and policies that I'm not familiar with and answering them. And then for ethical scenarios, again, I did some of the stuff that the other presenters mentioned, just like practicing different questions, working on a structure, and then for the personal questions, those are very important for Toronto. You really want to basically work on all 3 question styles, because they might ask anything, any mix. Basically see which ones you're weaker at, spend more time on that, and you'll be good. Can you talk more about U of T's interview format since it seems very unique? So I don't want to exactly mention specific questions because I can't do that, but their format is asynchronous. You're basically talking to yourself. This you'll be able to see that in the Cura Talent platform. So that was one of my tips, but this is one of my tips, but practice recording yourself because that's exactly the format that it will be on the real interview, and you want to be confident talking on camera with no one there listening. It's very weird, but just practice for that. Should I continue or answer more questions? Should I just continue?
Yeah, we got it back on board. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. Okay, yeah. So my next tip is to practice your storytelling. So storytelling includes both the structure that how you communicate your answer as well as the content. So first let's talk about a structure. The STAR structure is very useful. S stands for situation, which means describe the context and the background, your role. T stands for task. That is the challenge you faced or what you want, the goal of the whole thing that you were trying to do, the task. A stands for action. Tell me what you did, how you did it, and why you took those actions. And the most important part of your answer is the result. Of course, say what the outcome was, but what you learned from the experience is the whole point of the response, because you want to discuss your takeaway from that experience. You want to make sure you have enough time to talk about this, because if you spend too much time on the background, you won't have time to talk about the reflections you had afterwards. So for that fourth part, you want to make sure you discuss what you learned from it and any future impacts, because you might have changed the ways you do things from then on, or you might have a new goal for the future. You want to talk about the impact of that experience. And then my other suggestion was to make sure to my other suggestion was that pauses are okay in when answering questions, because sometimes you might get, in terms of your storytelling, sometimes you might get you might lose track of thought, or you might could be going too fast. Between each sentence and between each point, make sure you take a pause. Pauses do seem longer to you than they actually are, and it's okay to take pauses. So make sure that you're pausing, slowing down to think what you want to say next, and that will help you a little bit more in terms of your speed and the way you're answering. One thing I forgot to mention here is quirky questions. Those are those weird questions that you might get, such as, what kind of a kitchen appliance would you be? So the point of these questions is to test you to see if you can stay calm. These are very hard to think of on the spot. They might stress you a lot. So staying calm when answering these questions already got you halfway there. The other point is to just try to answer and see if you can relate to, for example, for the kitchen appliance thing, do you like cooking? Maybe you can relate to how you're interested in cooking and how you learn to be a good cook. Or if you're not good at cooking, maybe you can talk about how you're working on learning how to cook, for example. This can show personal development and it will relate it to yourself. My next tip is to record yourself. I kind of touched on this, but recording yourself was a game changer for me, recording myself, because I was able to kind of figure out what my weaknesses are and work on fixing it. For example, is there anything distracting you doing, such as moving your chair around a lot, using your hands too excessively, or using filler words? The other thing would be, for example, are you spending too much time on the background of the question you're answering and not enough time on reflecting on the lessons you learned? You can kind of figure that out from the recording. is, do you sound confident, or are there any gaps in your story? Does the interviewer have to assume things to understand what you're trying to convey? So recording yourself is real good. You can also send these recordings to others, your parents, siblings, friends, family. Even sending them to non-science people can give you a fresh perspective and help make your answers very well-rounded. It's just a quick answer you can send to others, and it will really help you get more perspectives on your response. My next tip is to
Wait,
make
Sarah,
sure
can
you're,
I just add to that?
yeah,
Yeah, that was a super top tip, because a lot of the times, you know, you're saying these personal stories from your life. You know what's going on. You know that you had this professor, and you know, last week you were dealing with this and that. But then when you say it to someone else, you're like, man, what the heck is going on? So definitely record yourself and send it to others.
I've had that happen to me. Like, my friend was like, "What are you saying? I don't understand what you're saying in this part of the video." So, then you can fix it. So it's super useful. Okay. So yeah, my next tip is to make sure you have an answer for why do you want to study medicine. At this point, it is expected of you to know this. Even if you're doing an MMI, they might ask you. So make sure you spend time reflecting on this. And sometimes this is very tough. Every single person's story is unique, and don't try to make your answer sound like anyone else's. Instead, try to spend time brainstorming, and I can give you a list of questions you can kind of use to reflect on this. For example, when was the first time you realized you wanted to be a doctor? Think about that experience. The next question you can think about is, what experiences made you more interested in medicine or solidified this path for you? Was there any moment where you thought to yourself, oh, this is the only thing I want to do for my career? And another question that's very useful to ask yourself is, why do you want to study medicine and not any other profession? So this could actually be a separate question that they could ask you, but it can also help you think about why you want to study medicine. So just like spend some time reflecting on these. And a question I forgot to add here is, tell me about yourself. I used to get super stressed by this question, but it's not that deep. Honestly, they just want to get to know you briefly. You can talk about where you grew up, what hobbies you have. Hobbies are really good to mention here because they're looking for well-rounded people, and mentioning those hobbies can make you sound more personable, or you might even have something in common with the interviewer and connect over. So this can be this should not take more than 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes. So just quickly introduce yourself and move on. Usually it might even be asked in conjunction with another question mixed up, such as, tell me about yourself and why you want to study medicine. So don't spend too much time on it and just introduce yourself. My last tip is spend some time reflecting on why you want to go to that school. This is important because they might actually ask you this, and if you can't answer it, that will look bad. But there's also another reason why, and I'll tell you in a sec. But when looking at why you want to go to that school, go through their mission and values on their website. See if there's anything that that resonates with you. For example, are there any specific programs, research programs, advocacy initiatives, interest groups, global health initiatives, anything that you're interested in that really resonates with you? Think of those, and when you're answering this question, you can also mention your personal experiences that led you to be interested in that specific initiative. So that is very useful. But I remember in learning all my interviews, if I ever answered a question that touched on one of these interests, I mentioned that program from that school. For example, I worked with marginalized populations a lot during my undergrad, and this is something that I want to do as a physician. And so whenever I talked about experiences where I worked with marginalized populations, I also, at the end, I briefly touched on the school's initiative. For example, a student-run clinic that worked with these populations, to say that I'm interested in doing this and that the school will help me achieve this goal of working with these populations as a physician. This will really set you apart if you do it, but just don't force it if it doesn't match the thing you were talking about before. And it shows that you're really interested in that school. Yeah, so those are my tips. I can answer some questions now. Let's see. How much do you need to know about health topics like opioids, rural health? You might get, these are fair game questions. You might get them, so make sure you go through all of those categories that Susan mentioned. I also did something very similar as her. So yeah, I recommend doing that. How much you need to know, be able to talk about it for 5, maybe you don't need to talk about it for 5. Don't ever feel like you need to complete the full time, because then you'll sound like you're basically repeating yourself, and you'll lose your interviewer. So make sure that you're not going too much over, you're not saying more than you have to say, but have enough to talk about a few points maybe. So yeah, that's one answer. How do you answer quirky questions for 5 minutes? Yeah, so should you link it to a personal example that shows your good quality? Yes, if possible, try your best to actually do that, because let's take the cooking example I talked about. Cooking itself is an interest. You can talk about it, about how you kind of worked on that, on becoming better at cooking, and that's a personal experience, obviously, and working towards getting better at that skill on its own would show dedication. Maybe if you failed at something, you can talk about resilience and so on. So they're of course very tough to try and relate to yourself. So just gotta get a bunch of just Google quirky interview questions and try a bunch of them to get used to it, and get used to relating to them with your personal stories. Do you have any advice on how to discuss weaknesses or negatives you mentioned, and frame them without alarming the panel? So yeah, that's a great question. I think I touched on that a little bit. So again, just talk. It's good to prepare them beforehand so that you're not raising red flags. I guess I can give you an example. When were you not a communicator? So I worked as a personal trainer during my undergrad, and I talked about how I kind of messed up the timing with one of my clients, and we came when the gym was closed. So that was really embarrassing. I literally said, that was so embarrassing for me. So I made sure from then on, I checked in with the gym timing and came in 1 hour in advance, or to make sure that everything was ready and set up so that this didn't happen again. So something like that is a negative, and so that's a very good way to answer, because you're also saying, okay, I took these steps to prevent it from happening again, and I made sure to be a better communicator. Yeah, so
Sarah, and we'll wrap it up with that. We have one last section, but
okay.
thank you so much, Sarah. Everybody give a big thank you to Sarah for joining us.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Today, she's also available. I think she's one of our only two people at the University of Toronto. So if you're interviewing there, make sure to check out Sarah's profile on thebrightdoctor.com. Send her a message /marketplace. All right. Oh, and by the way, super cool thing. We're only doing this until tomorrow night. Okay. This is unheard of. If you get a friend to register for the Bright Doctor for free, just make a free account and email us your email and their email, the emails you use to sign up. We will give you both $10 gift credit towards your consults. So you can, use it on Sarah and you'll have $10 off, basically 10 Canadian dollars off. Just email us like who your buddy was that you made sign up, or like you asked to sign up. And just free accounts, and we'll give you both $10. Not only that, so make sure you do that by tomorrow night, okay? By tomorrow night, and just email us by tomorrow night. But also, crazy enough, every single friend you do this to, up to 5 friends, will give you another $10. So if you get 5 friends to just sign up, make a free account, will give you 5 $10 credit vouchers. I hope that makes sense. I mean, I think it makes sense. The instructions are right here. So yeah, definitely sign up and save money. I mean, why the heck not? And yeah, we showed how, you know, for personal questions, you can see several different answers. And now the last segment, y'all, okay? The last segment, motivational interviewing and talking like a talk show host. So I've never, you know, I'm usually in all these webinars, I've never talked about these two topics. Actually, I talked about the second one, not motivational interviewing. So many interviews in Canada, okay? In Canada, in the US, you're given a scenario where you have to talk to someone. And it doesn't matter if you're doing an MMI. Oh, Kevin, I'm doing an asynchronous MMI. I'm safe. I'm safe. Oh, I don't have to know how to talk to people. You're not safe. Hey, you're not safe. Your friend Elliot expresses concern with getting vaccines, citing information that they saw online. Consequently, they might not be able to perform their clinical rotations at an external site. I'm not even going to say the school because of NDA stuff, but I got a Canadian school. It was something like this, but like vaccines, and now they're going to be kicked off the soccer team. Okay, so if you guys interviewed previous cycles, you might know what school I'm talking about. We'd have to have interviewed 2 cycles ago. Anyways, so what was I getting at? If in a panel interview, they can be like, all right, you're the friend. All right, so talk to Elliot right now. And then there's going to be some person there. It's usually a medical student who's like a 4th year medical student as part of who's interviewing you, who's going to be Elliot, and they're going to be trained to, you know, some standardized patient or something. They're just going to be trained to kind of, you know, give you some pushback a little bit, and then, you know, allow you to talk to them and see what kind of talker you are. So this is called motivational interviewing. MMI, I mean, I've had this in traditional interviews, right? I can't say the schools, but I mean, it would be a very good interest to you guys, especially given the timing, if you know what I mean. But I've also seen this in MMIs. So, you know, sometimes MMIs, there's someone live in front of you, right? Like McMaster, but also sometimes MMIs, they're async, and you just have to kind of describe how you would talk to this person, okay? And there's a framework for this, guys. And this framework is literally tested on US medical school board exams, maybe Canadian too. I don't know. Okay, I wouldn't know. But I've taken step 1. Okay, I'm taking step 1. So the US board exam. So you have to basically move a person to the next stage of change. Okay, and I'll give you a very good example. For example, quitting smoking, all right? So when I was doing, you know, some clinical stuff as part of my first year, I had a patient. I was supposed to, you know, just get her history. And, you know, it was some other condition. And then at the end, I found out, yo, she's a smoker and she has a couple kids, right? So my preceptor is like, yo, go do some motivational interviewing with her and get her to, you know, about stopping smoking. So I do some research, like, you know, how am I supposed to talk to her, right? I do like 5 minutes of Google searches, and I stumble upon this, which is actually what I was supposed to do in the first place. And, you know, you first got to prod the person, hey, like, what do you think about, you know, quitting smoking? Have you ever thought about it, right? Because you got to understand, have they ever thought about it? And this person said to me, no, I've never, you know, I'm not interested in quitting smoking. I'm not interested in quitting smoking, okay? And I said, and this was the key, right? This was the key. Because most people would be like, oh, well, why not? Oh, it's fine. But it's not even a bad way to go about it. But there's a very effective thing you can do, okay? And the evidence, I mean, it's all evidence-backed. It's get them to kind of have spark some sort of awareness in them, okay? And the question I asked her was, well, are there any reasons that you think quitting smoking would be important? And boom, she said, you know, well, yeah, I mean, you know, I have a family history of XYZ relevant to, that would, you know, smoking would exacerbate it. So, and then that's all I did. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm ready to talk, you know, in future sessions and whatnot. And I kind of left it at that, maybe because I was an amateur. But anyways, I did the key thing, which was getting her to consider just, you know, have some sort of conflict, like, oh, you know, there are reasons, and to acknowledge the reasons. And because now you want to move from pre-contemplation, no, I'm not trying to quit smoking at all, to contemplation. Hey, okay, maybe I should quit smoking, okay? And guys, if you don't believe me that this stuff is like literally board exam tested, here's straight out of UWorld, okay? Straight out of UWorld, okay? We're gonna read this. By the way, sorry if you got PTSD, but this is straight out of UWorld. A 52-year-old man comes to the office for a routine follow-up appointment. Patient has a history of well-controlled hypertension and hyperlipidemia, okay? 35 pack year smoking history and reports that he continues to smoke about 10 to 15 cigarettes daily. All right. Family history significant for, pretty bad stuff. And then when asked about whether he is considered quitting, the patient replies that he is not ready to stop smoking. He says, I know I probably should, but I'm just too stressed at work to give up my cigarettes right now. To be honest, I'm probably smoking closer to a pack a day. Which of the following is the most appropriate response to the patient? All right. And sorry, guys, I took the screenshot once I answered it. But yeah, I goofed this one up apparently. But here's the right answer. What do you worry will happen if you quit smoking? What about if you don't quit? And that's literally what I asked. And I thought it was so interesting. Wait, did I cut off, guys? Hello? Did I cut off?
No, you're good.
No, you're good.
Okay, I'm good. All right. So I was like, guys, I'm an idiot because I literally said the same sentence. I said the same sentence to a patient and I just got it wrong in UWorld. I hope it doesn't bode poorly for step one. But anyways, yes, this is what you should do, okay? But it's just very nuanced, right? Because these are all solid answers. But the thing is, you can actually have a framework and a very mature, evidence-backed way of approaching these questions, which I've seen on many interviews. So take a look at this. We're gonna send you the slides. Don't stress, okay? And lastly, the last point. All right, it's my favorite point. Talk like a talk show host. Find your favorite political person. Find your favorite, talk show host, your favorite commentator online. I don't care what side of the political spectrum they're on. Try to, in my opinion, it's really helped me. And it's really what I did in the second cycle. I applied 2 cycles, is speaking in a really engaging manner. Like I'm kind of teaching someone something, And I'm going to give you an example, okay? I'm going to give you an example. For example, okay, talk about how can we make sure that AI, as AI progresses, it'll best serve our, underserved populations. We make sure it serves marginalized populations, okay? So the first cycle I applied, I'd say something like, well, with artificial intelligence is gaining in prevalence, and we have to make sure, in order to make it best serve our marginalized populations, it needs to be able to be trained on representative training data. Because if you have an AI model, the output is only as good as the input. So if we only train it on, say, a certain population, white people, Asian people, it won't be able to generalize well to helping individuals of other races. So we have to make sure there's no bias also in our training data, right? There's no bias against sex or against race in our training data, and continually monitor. And I'd say something like that, right? Which is a pretty textbook answer. I mean, it's a pretty solid answer. Was that a good answer? I mean, it was probably a good answer. But watch what I did the second cycle I applied, okay? Same questions being asked to me. Then I'll be like, whoa. AI, I mean, hey, this is the question of our time, right? ChatGPT, Claude, all these new AI models, every single day you hear about them more and more. We're using ChatGPT to analyze medical records, okay? We're using AI to diagnose EKGs. So this is obviously the direction we're going in. Now let's make sure if we're going to be doing this, we're doing it in the right way, okay? So for example, one thing, when you have these AI models, you have to train them with data, right? So you put in some data and then the AI model learns based on gradient descent, based on deep learning. There's a lot of different methods. But anyways, what matters is we have to make sure the data we input into our models is representative of the values that we want to uphold in our medical system. Do you see the difference, guys? Do you see the difference? Put in the chat if you see the difference. If you don't see the difference, tell me you're crazy. Tell me you're crazy. Do you see the difference? Or you guys see the difference, right? That is my style, okay? So I really think this made a huge difference for me. But at a minimum, the core understanding is it comes down to confidence, okay? Maybe you don't talk like a talk show host, but it's about confidence. And for me, trying to mimic my favorite talk show host actually made me, fake it till you make it, answer very confidently in my answers. All right, so that's my last point to leave you guys with. If you want to access our question banks, by the way, let me refresh. Yeah, so here, you can see there's all these questions for the health policy of different provinces as well. Okay, if you want to access those, we're going to be sending you a code right now to your emails. All right, you should be receiving it right now. You're going to be receiving the slides to this presentation right now. So if you don't receive it right now, check your spam. Okay, check your spam. But anyways, here's a code you can use if you wish to use our question banks. Right. And lastly, good luck, y'all. And I'm going to stay back for some Q&A for the next 10, 15 minutes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. By the way, the recording. Sorry. I've been asked this 100 times. Yeah, the recording will be here in the next 48 hours. In past webinars, these are all free. You can check them out. So, by the way, you have to make an account to get the recording, okay? Make an account and log into past webinars and you'll get the recording. It'll be here. My pleasure, Brianna. If you guys didn't receive an email, check your spam. Okay, Hyundai asks, does this talk show speaking work for asynchronous? Yeah, for asynchronous interviews too. I mean, I talk like I'm recording a YouTube video. I really do. I mean, I record a lot of YouTube videos back in the day. How do you recommend I structure my interview prep? So what I recommend, Noor, is really, I like studying near the night. So, I mean, study during the day, but especially at night, review like things that you missed or like just things, oh, I should have stopped doing this, or I could have mentioned this when I asked this. Because at night, you just remember things better if you study at night. And that's why last minute cramming for exams works. You're welcome, Olamide. You're welcome, Sarah. Yeah, Cheyenne, if you really want some quick health policy review, I mean, it's not going to be exhaustive, but if your interview's in like a week, check out our TMU recording. We go over a lot of them. A lot of like 20 topics. Okay, check out TMU. Fine. Talani, and by the way, the TMU recording is in our past webinar section. Talani says, thank you. Thanks for lifesaver. My pleasure, Doug. My pleasure, Ishan, Karen, or Karan. I think it's Karan. My pleasure, John. My pleasure, Sasha. Yeah, the code expires, I think, in the next day or two. It'll be in the email. Nagar asks, can you talk about how you change your approach? I mean, yeah. That's how I changed it. Definitely second response time or ground about lots of specific changes you made. Okay, I go over this in depth in some of the webinars, but I will go over this next week. So are you interviewing? If you're interviewing at anywhere except, I think, Queens, just tune in next week. We're going to send you guys all an email to the next week session. And yeah, just tune in next week and I'll go over like more in depth about changes I made second cycle. But I mean, it comes down to a few things, right? I applied US the second cycle. I got like this research internship in the summer, which I think can be useful, especially when you get rejected and you apply another time. It's kind of like a stamp of approval. Like I didn't just do some random research. I got paid for it. You know, you don't need it, obviously. Most people I know didn't have some research internship, but I felt like that helped. Any advice on acting stations? I need to say things that otherwise wouldn't. Well, the thing is, they're not going to vent for 5 minutes, so they're going to just say something to kind of maybe provoke you or to gauge what you're going to say back. And when it comes to the acting stations or like with the collaborative stations, a big thing is keep checking understanding. Like, oh, this is what I said clear? So let me know if you have any questions. Like, just like a lot of like good communication skills, you know. And also rewind back to when I talked about the motivational interview part. I don't know if you're talking about something else, just put in the chat. Also, if we should acknowledge you're out of time. Don't acknowledge you're out of time. I mean, it's like they understand. If it's between like just saying thank you or getting another point in, or concluding, I try to get another point in if possible. I try to get another point in. Big interview date. Yeah, Brianna, I'm not too sure about Western this cycle. It hasn't come out yet, right? Has Western come out? Mika, thank you very much. My pleasure, Mika. Sailor Sam, what a cool name. Are we being graded? So, I mean, the actors, in my opinion, in my experience, they've been like pretty easy to change their mind. You just have to be not crazy, you know, you just have to not prod them like in an aggressive way. But yeah, it's kind of like you got to warm them up. So look at the motivational interviewing stuff. I think the key is to kind of like warm them up. Because if you try to like use some really good solutions towards the beginning, they might be hesitant. But if you warm them up, they're probably instructed to like agree with you. That's been my experience. Your past seminars for paid members, only no free members can access those. How do you recommend researching topics? I mean, listen, the point of the entire resource, the question banks, is so you don't have to spend dozens, hundreds of hours researching common answers to interview questions, MMI questions, panel questions. So we've compiled hundreds. and from, purchased answers from many medical students for you, along with ideas to go beyond, how to even go beyond, an expert answer that's been giving my medical student. And then after you're done that, it's just really, I like focusing my time on just my interview techniques. So recording yourself, like Sarah was saying, that should be the record feature. Sending recordings off, and if you can get a mock interview or two with someone, or even like just reading up on just the news. Just keep reading up on the news. Why not? But half of it is your knowledge. The other half is your delivery. Like I said, the confidence part. Now, if you keep reading, like if you go through these banks, right? Things are gonna stick to you. You're gonna have more than enough content to cover if you're asked like some question on, I don't know, what do you think about privatization of healthcare, for example, right? And then it just becomes how you're gonna deliver that message, how you can show your values. Like I said, talking like a talk show host. At the beginning, I love to just summarize the issue and be like, "Oh, guys, we need to make sure we're doing this thing right. We have AI looking at our EKGs. Got to make sure." That's how I like to introduce my background on a topic. Just see if there's any tips on how to set up your video or outfits. Yeah, dress professionally, y'all. Like, why would you dress weird? I would not pull up like this in an interview. Okay, I might pull up like this too. Night out, but not my medical school interview. But I didn't wear actually I did wear a formal, I did wear a suit. I did. At least to Ottawa. McMaster, I'm not sure. I might have wore a suit. I think I might have wore a suit to McMaster. Guys, I don't know the ladies' etiquette. I actually have no clue. But for gentlemen, yeah, I'd wear a suit or at a minimum, like one of those very nice quarter zips, and then have like some like collar tie situation going on under. That's my opinion, right? For the question to ask you, why medicine? Is it okay to bring up religious influence or aspect? Hey, Jung-yoon. So religion, I never brought up anything religious in my interviews. In the US, there are schools that are very religious. For example, I think Loma Linda University in California. As far as I'm concerned, if it's very meaningful to you in a very, it's not even a subtle way, but just you can mention it, why not? But don't make that like a corner piece, because you don't know the person on the other end. Maybe they're not religious. Maybe that just doesn't make sense to them. It just doesn't connect to them, right? Fortunately, religion can be like politics sometimes. Noor says, so specifically, would you say 2 hours a day? I mean, Noor, like, are you going to study for 2 hours, then call it a day? The thing is, yeah, you raise a good point. I wouldn't time it. It's just any free pocket of time I had, whether I was at the gym, I'd listen to something cool, or, review expert answers is really the best way, because you can see if you're missing things, right? Missing things in your answers. Just set aside like blocks of time. 2 hours a day. One day you might not have any time. 3 hours a day, guys. You're gonna get to the other end of the slide. You're gonna be like, guys, these are silly questions. Do it a few hours a day, because listen, you're only you don't want this. You don't want to reapply, right? So you have one shot. Study hard, and all your practice doesn't have to be like super stressed practice. Your practice could just be, speaking to the camera, and just making sure you can look at the camera and keep speaking, making sure you keep having dialogue, and just, kind of a free form. So there's a lot of different practice you can do. You mentioned you'll go over on Serial Pulse next week, as well. You can sign up for that. Yeah, we're gonna email you the link, Jessica. Margin says he has not received the email. Margin, check your spam. What is your link for Brightspace? Shalom. I don't know what that means, but you might mean Bright Doctor. It's just www.thebrightdoctor.com. brightdoctor.com. And then once you log in, you can check the recording right here, okay? So if you did not receive our email, not even in spam, please email info@brightstudent.org, and we will send you We will send you the information. Resources for Quebec. We have a Quebec question bank, Quebec policy. Let me check if I'm capping. I'm not capping. Boom, right here. Okay. I'm on a free account. I don't know why. But yeah, we have Quebec Health Policy Q Bank. It's locked. It's gonna make me have to purchase. But yeah, we do have that. What are the other questions? Yeah, if you have 3 weeks left, I mean, oh, okay, here's some good advice. Spend at least a day or two gathering all the personal stories from your life that could be relevant to personal style questions. Okay, I mean, it's as simple as that. You look at the CanMeds pillars, have like 2 to 3 stories for each. Okay, 2 to 3 stories for like each CanMeds pillar. And then the only way you're gonna know if you're missing stories, which if you have 2 to 3 stories for each CanMeds pillar, and be like good at reciting them in the STAR method, okay? Be good at reciting them in the STAR method. Have takeaways for each story. I went through all of this. I think I went through all of this in the Queen's webinar. You can check that out, but we'll also go over it again next week. But the only way you can really, guys, what's going on? Yeah, know if you're missing stories is just by doing a lot of personal practice questions, okay? So if I come here, you'll see what I mean. Go to MMI Q Bank, reset progress. Okay, we're gonna get back to like 100 something. I'm gonna uncheck all of these, and you just do back to back personal style questions. Boom. A woman comes to you. Boom. Why do you want to be a doctor, not a nurse? Okay, I've been asked this twice in Canada and in the US. You want to know the answer to this. You want to have a solid answer to this. Okay. Boom. It's a paid question. You can just screenshot this, I guess. Just do more and more questions, and then you'll realize, hey, I'm missing some sort of stories, you know. Why don't you go to past tests? Let's see what else we had. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, like ship positions and about to strike. What's your greatest accomplishment to date? I mean, there's a lot of personal questions, and just going through them is the only way you're going to realize, hey, which stories am I lacking? So I would recommend you guys do that as well.